Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So what's the most consistent way to start a company? Well, you find a problem and you decide to solve it. It really is that simple. Now, that problem does not need to change the world. You don't need to solve world hunger, and you don't need to be the next Elon Musk to make a difference. All you need to do is find a way to make somebody's life just a little bit better than it was before. These little modest problems are often hiding in plain sight, so they're easy to miss. But when noticed, and when given some attention, these tiny little problems can be turned into massive opportunities. In 2007, Andy Dunn did take notice of just such a problem, or really, a small annoyance. He and his college roommate couldn't find a pair of pants that fit. They were either too tight or too boxy, so they pulled out their shears, some thread, and a sewing machine, and decided to create the perfect pair of dress pants and a brand called Bonobos. After 3 years of selling a few hundred pairs of pants through word of mouth, Bonobos raised their first round of funding and an expanded vision. They wanted to create a shopping experience for men that, frankly, didn't suck. 9 years later, Bonobos is the largest online clothing brand that's been launched and built on the web with over $100 million in revenue. Now, in addition to his duties as CEO for Bonobos, Andy's become a prolific angel investor through his fund, Red Swan. Now, today, they own equity in dozens of startups, including Birchbox, Warby Parker, Coinbase, Harry's, and TaskRabbit, to name just a few. This episode is a masterclass on building a startup, creating a brand, and building an experience that your customers will always remember. As I was doing my homework for this episode, I actually realized that Bonobos had recently opened a guide shop 2 blocks from my home here in downtown Austin. So after my interview with Andy, I decided to swing by to see what the brand was all about in person. I left an hour later with an entirely new collection of clothes that fit just right without the need for tailoring and at a price that was a fraction of what I was expecting. So I would highly recommend that if you're a guy, you check them out. If you're a gal and you have a man in your life, send them over to Bonobos. It was a fantastic experience. And in the meantime, here's the story behind the brand, how it was created, and some incredibly valuable advice from its founder, Andy Dunn. All right, welcome back, everybody. Mike Dillard here, and today we have an entrepreneur that I have been unbelievably impressed by. The more I've gotten to know him, the more I've really just come to respect who he is as a man and also what he has accomplished as an entrepreneur. But Andy Dunn, welcome to Self-Made Man.
Thanks, Mike. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the time. I know you are incredibly busy. So I'm incredibly grateful for you joining us here today. And as we had mentioned a couple of minutes ago, as we were kind of warming up to get started here today, you're the founder and board member. But are you still the active CEO of Bonobos?
I am. Yeah. So I've been the CEO of Bonobos now just occurred to me the other day. I'm in my 10th year, and I had a brief stint last summer where I brought on a CEO and became the executive chairman. And then when that didn't take off the way we expected it, jump back in. So I was out of the job for 86 days last year and got a taste of chairman life, and then jump right back in.
Well, we'll definitely get to the details behind that story because I'm definitely curious about it. But you have a store here just a couple of blocks away from my house here in downtown Austin. I'm going to be going by there and checking it out today. But if you could, for those who are unaware of the brand, tell us how you got started as an entrepreneur and where this massive and quickly growing online fashion company for men came about.
It's funny. I love this concept that Paul Graham writes about. He's a YC Combinator investor out of Silicon Valley, and he's done a bunch of writing. It's all on his blog, easy to Google. But my favorite essay that he wrote is How to Get Startup Ideas. And in that essay, he talks about how when you look at a company that's established, you see all these products, all these customer segments, all this distribution. A lot of times you assume it started that way. But he has this beautiful analogy, which is that most companies that survive and move from the startup era to established company era, did so by starting with a really narrow and deep niche and starting with a really narrow and deep customer problem. And so he calls that, he makes a nice analogy. He calls that the well. And the well is, the depth of the well is the significance of the problem, and the width of the well is the number of people that have it. And so what you want is a tiny well widthwise, but really deep, because that enables you to solve a really important problem for a very easy to focus on group of people. And so for us with Bonobos, that was guys that couldn't find pants that fit. We had this belief that there had been tremendous progress made in the denim world with fit in the 90s, in the early 2000s. Massive proliferation of great denim brands, whether you're talking about AG or 7 for All Mankind. The male consumer was educated that it was worth investing in denim. We went from, our father's generation, which was wear Levi's, to spend over $100 for, or maybe even over $150 for a great pair of 7 jeans. In our view was that had not yet transferred to the pants world. And so had a wonderful co-founder named Brian Spaley who had this insight. He made a better fitting pair of pants. The way that they work is they have a curved waistband at the top, which better approximates a guy's anatomy, and then just the right rise, just the right tailored level of a thigh, and the overall impact is the pant just fits much better in the most important part, which is the top half. So when you sit down, you're comfortable, but when you stand up, you've got a great silhouette. Looks like your pants fit you perfectly. And so we had this wonderful hero product, and we said, maybe we can actually build this brand on the internet. Maybe we can use the internet as the primary engine for storytelling, transacting, interacting with the consumer. And it turns out that was a revelation. This was before we had Warby Parker or Casper or Dollar Shave Club or any of these great, what I now call digitally native vertical brands, DNVBs. We were the pioneer in that space. And so we did it by solving a simple problem, which is guys that couldn't find pants that fit.
I mean, it's interesting. You and I are right about the same age, and I'm just getting flashbacks of Khaki Dockers, right? Like,
exactly.
That's what dress pants were for me growing up, and I haven't owned a pair in 10 or 15 years for that exact same reason. It's just you're just not going to look good in them. And so that's interesting that y'all saw kind of the same issue and you decided to go solve that. And one of the first things that pops into my head, because I'm not from, the retail industry or fashion at all, is the fact that from an outsider looking in, okay, that's a really great idea. You're solving a problem that exists, but that's such an easy thing for other existing brands to accommodate for and to transfer over to their line, right? Like, hey, we can make our pants fit better as well. How do you think about that? Because to me, I would just, I don't know, it's one of the first things that pops in my head as far as how easy it could be transferred over to a competitor.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Mike. The truth is, and this is a little bit of the nuance of our strategy, it's virtually impossible to replicate what we've done. And let me dig into the nuanced reason for that. So when we decided to go digital native, there were 3 principal benefits of it. One is we could reach a really wide audience right away. So you can go national, if not global, as a brand from the very early years versus the more traditional mechanism of build out, which is kind of store by store, market by market. 2 is we could create a bundle, and the bundle was going to be of great pants and great customer service. And there's a paradox in the traditional retail world, which is if the majority of your distribution is through inventoried brick and mortar, it's almost impossible to deliver a great service experience. Very infrequently do you walk into a retail store that sells clothing and say, wow, I just got the best customer service I've ever gotten. There's a couple exceptions to that. Nordstrom, who are one of our partners, is really the pioneer in delivering a reliably great in-person service experience, but they're the exception, not the rule. And so by launching Bonobos with really great policies around free shipping and from a returns perspective and free shipping both ways on the one hand, and then building this energetic and empathetic customer service team that we called the Ninjas back in 2007, when the word was a little bit less overused, we created this service experience that for us was as important as the actual physical product, the pants themselves. And one of the learnings of the digitally native vertical brand era is that by bundling together great service and great product, you can create a higher level of customer affinity and enthusiasm than would be possible if you were just a physical product company sold through the traditional channels. So by owning that relationship and delivering great service, you're doing something that your competitors can't do, particularly if you're the first to market and you can be the first to scale in the digitally native vertical brand niche. And that's why we're seeing, if you take the mattress category right now, such tremendous competition between, say, Casper and Tuft and Needle, because now the secret is out there. It's no longer a secret that building a digital brand is a superior customer experience, in category by category. People are rushing into it. And so we're excited and we feel lucky at Bonobos that we had that insight that digitally native brands could become a better bundle, and we've got a 10-year head start in menswear. And then the third piece, and this is really sort of a nerdy point, so bear with me, is that we only manage one base of inventory at Bonobos. And as a result, we're able to offer much greater depth and fit. So in terms of our Wash Chino Hero product, our stretch Wash Chino product, we've got 40 different waist and inseam combinations, which is probably somewhere between 50 and 100% more than our peers. So we're talking sizes like 35 by 32 and 32 by 34, 31 by 30. These are hard sizes to find typically, and we have got more depth in size than anyone else. We also have more depth in fit silhouette. So we now at this point have got a straight leg, a slim leg, a tailored leg, an athletic leg, and in some cases a boot leg. So now you've got 4 to 5 fits. And then from a color standpoint, we're not just running your basic colors, we're running a full slate of fashion colors. So we might have 15 to 20 colors running in a program. When you add that up, variant-wise, we're offering maybe 4,000 to 5,000 variants of product. So the best way to describe this in layman's terms is it's a custom fit without the weight and the hassle of custom clothing. And the only way you can architect a brand with that much assortment, with that incremental level of customer delight in terms of the fit, the color, and the size that you're offering, is if you've got a direct-to-consumer strategy where you're just managing one base of inventory. Otherwise, it's an inventory nightmare. And so these are the benefits of going digitally native. We've capitalized that in the men's space, and we think it absolutely insulates us from incumbents. Now, it doesn't mean that new entrants couldn't replicate it. And so that's why we're racing at making sure that we're the winning men's brand that is digitally native.
And just for folks who are not familiar with the term digitally native, you would define that as basically a business that is, built and bred to do business primarily online instead of through a retail.
Well, this is the fun part, Mike, is that when we started the brand, we assumed because of these benefits of particularly delivering better service because we were digitally oriented and better fit, which is effectively the simple way to describe that long and rambling speech I gave, soliloquy, if we call it, about the way that our strategy delivers better fit choice. We assumed that we would never be able to replicate this in a physical retail environment, because the nature of a physical retail environment is you've got to have a ton of inventory. It's impossible to be in stock across all these different sizes and colors and fits, in that to the extent that you try your best to be in stock, you're managing a ton of inventory on the floor and in a stock room. You've got a big store that takes a big investment and where it's very hard to deliver great service. So I always assumed we would never have stores. And then in 2011, something miraculous happened, which is we put 2 fitting rooms in the lobby of our headquarters here in the Flatiron District of New York. We're at 25th Street and 6th Avenue in Manhattan, just to kind of test out in-person fittings with consumers. And we discovered a radical consumer behavior, which is that guys would come in, they would get fitted, they would look at samples, and then they would place an e-commerce order, walk out hands-free, without bags, without boxes, and get that order delivered to their doorstep, whether that was at work or at home. And from that, we had 2 insights. The first insight was guys like to touch and feel and try on clothes. Okay, duh, that's not changing. But number 2, and this is where the real innovation was discovered, they don't need to walk out with the product to be happy. In fact, they might be happier if they don't have to, so that they can jump back to work, head to the gym, go out to a restaurant. And that combination of insights led to the development of a guide shop. And the guide shop is our retail store model. It's a revelation in terms of the way a retail store operates. You get phenomenal customer service, one-to-one guided appointment. You get a better fit than is possible in a competitive brand because of all those variants that we offer. And you don't have to do your own fulfillment. We do it for you. We ship it right to you. And as of last week, we now have 25 of those guide shops, and they have become a really critical part of our strategy as a brand.
Yeah, I'm like I mentioned earlier, I'm looking forward to walking down there here when we're done and checking it out, since it's right across the street from me. But one of the other questions that pops into my head is, where are your thoughts on the whole concept, which has been hinted over the last couple of years, but never really introduced on scale, of the whole, laser scanning your body so that your measurements can just be submitted to on-demand designers, and your clothes are, perfectly custom fit and shipped to you. Is that a fad? Is that going to become a reality at some point?
One of the fun things about this experience, Mike, has been the level of innovation that's happening right now at this intersection of digital and retail. It's just tremendous. When we launched the company, Facebook didn't have an advertising platform. Instagram didn't exist. E-commerce infrastructure for startup brands was in its infancy. Every year, every month, frankly, every week, there is something new happening in the marketplace at this intersection of retail and technology, retail and digital, that is making it more exciting to be building a brand that is at its core a digital brand. So when it comes to your question, there's certainly going to be innovation somewhere on this frontier of scanning, smartphones. Something is going to be a really big unlock where you're going to be able to transmit your sizing and potentially even your fit through some psychographic questions around how you want your clothing to fit to retailers like Bonobos. And those retailers, if they're doing their jobs, are going to be able to deliver you a better experience, whether that's getting product faster, getting better fitting product faster, getting better service. So we're on that frontier, and we're going to be in a position when the right technology takes off in terms of consumer behavior, we're going to be able to adopt that really quickly and incorporate it into our experience. For now, what we're finding is just offering a lot more fit, just by having really great fit blocks. And now it's not just pants. We've got comparably exciting fit blocks in shirts and suits, using the same strategy of being able to offer more fit and more sizing. Just being really good at that, and then having a retail model that enables us not to compromise that in terms of being out of stock and not having a great service experience, but enhances it. Just that right now is enough to be highly differentiated. And so we look forward to additional innovations that enable us to get better and better.
What is your philosophy, changing up gears just a little bit here, what is your philosophy or advice to men when it comes to clothing and fashion? Specifically for a lot of the listeners on the show today, myself included, work from home, have for the past 10 years essentially. So the way you dress, it takes makes less of an impact, if you will, when you're not interacting with other individuals. But there's, of course, something to be said about the importance of a first impression and how others judge you and how you're judged based on how you dress. So how does that play into your brand and your message to your market?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple things I would say. The first is that 80% of the battle in dressing well, and I call it a battle because one of the things that's not changing as the world becomes more e-commerce oriented and more technology enabled is guys are as lazy as ever. We're as lazy as ever when it comes to the effort that we want to put in to something like buying clothes and figuring out what clothes look good. So 80% of that battle is getting clothes that fit really well. And that's what our brand is here for. We've taken that process, which can be challenging, and we've created an assortment that meets that level of fit specificity, and then a service model, both online, the Ninjas-driven online service experience and the Guide Shop offline experience, to decrease the friction, to decrease the pain points for guys to get into great fitting clothes. But regardless of what brand you shop, fit is 80% of the battle. Figuring out which clothes fit you really well, which brands fit you really well in which categories, having a brand that's your go-to for denim, having a brand that's your go-to for a great fitting blazer, having a brand that's the perfect dress shirt. Once you get those basics down, and it's really a pant and a jean, which kind of is going to be comparable across shorts and swim, knowing which brand fits you really well from a woven shirt perspective, which is your dress shirt, your casual button-down shirt, and then knowing what brand fits you from a jacket suit standpoint. If you get those three pieces in place, other categories like sweaters, t-shirts, polos, outerwear that are easier to size, it's all going to fall into place. So you want to know, 5 sizes. You want to know your neck and your sleeve. You want to know your chest. And then you want to know your waist and your inseam. And then you want to know 3 fits. You want to know what fit you are from a silhouette perspective in a pant, what you are from a shirt, and what you are from a jacket standpoint. And that means you really need to get to know certain brands' fits. You need to be in the store trying it on, or you need to be shopping online, trying different fits and really nailing that fit. And it helps to get a second opinion. Get in front of a woman you love, whether it's a girlfriend or a wife, a mom or a daughter or a good friend, have her tell you, because women are far more sophisticated about fit and you'll get a really good perspective there. Maybe it's a good guy friend, who loves fashion a little bit more than you do. So figure out what fits you well. That's 80% of the battle. And then I would say the other 20% is unlocking your individual sense of style. What makes you feel more confident? For some guys, that's dressing loud. For some guys, it's blending in a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit of a pop of a pocket square or something that says, I'm a little bit more fashion forward than just your khakis and your blue shirt. And mixing in something into the way that you dress that feels authentic to you. And to do that, that's where it helps to have one of 2 things happening. Either you're spending some time looking at different fashion role models, finding someone that you really like the way they dress and paying attention to what they put together. For us, we just launched a big campaign with Jimmy Butler. I think he's got a great sense of style. Let's say you like what you see of, the Jimmy Butler imagery that's on our website or the video we just put together, and find that fashion role model. For me, I've got a couple who I used to look to, whether it's John F. Kennedy, whether it's Andre 3000 from Outkast, have a couple role models out there. And then find one brand out there, one service experience where you get really good style advice. So whether that's a guide at Bonobos, whether that's someone at another brand, whether that's a stylist, whether you're working with a shopping service like a Trunk Club, which my co-founder is the CEO of now, get some style guidance somewhere, because that other 20% is unlocking your personal sense of style. And it doesn't have to be a major effort with the innovation of companies like Bonobos. It's getting easier and easier. And so make that investment of time in those 2 things. And then once you do, there's not a lot of work going forward, then you can really have some fun with it.
Yeah, it's an interesting puzzle for sure, but I can't think of something that can provide more of an impact or open more doors than the way you present yourself and how it makes you feel as well, right? Instantly changes your confidence level if you feel like you look good when you walk out the door. So I think that's just something that's easy to overlook for guys specifically who are busy entrepreneurs, but it's a critical little piece of the puzzle.
Totally true.
So moving into how you guys got started, because you literally built this from the ground up. You were definitely in a difficult financial position personally when you started the company. It's not like this was, hey, this is my second or third. I've had an exit or 2 and I've got money to burn. You were well. I'll let you share the story, but furthest thing from that you could be. And so, how did you manage to bootstrap this? And then I would love to dive into the details in the process that you've gone through when it comes to raising capital, because that's something you've done very successfully as well.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, Mike, it started with a trip that I took to Kenya and Uganda back in the spring of 2007. And I had this wonderful experience of staying with a guy named Stanley, with Stanley and his wife and their 2 little kids. It changed my life. I spent a few nights living in, the equivalent of a mud hut type house, extremely disparate from what we see here in the U.S. And I think for those who have traveled to the developing world, they know what I'm talking about. It's these houses that look like, you could run through the wall if you needed to. And, in the morning for a shower, you go out behind the house and there's a combination of a shower and an outhouse, and there's a big bucket of cold water, and you dump it over your head and it's freezing. And that's your morning shower if you're lucky to have one, if there's clean water supply nearby. And so I spent a few nights living with a couple that are probably getting by on somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 US dollars a year in terms of the standard of living. So pure developing world family. And, my mom's an immigrant from India where, the GDP per capita is $2,000. I had a really remarkable life experience living in El Salvador when I was 23. GDP per capita is $2,000. It's really poor. And a few weeks later, I was back at Stanford Business School, and me and 4 classmates had a house on El Camino Real in Atherton. I think the zip code's 94027, wealthiest zip code in the country. And I had this palatial shower with 2 shower heads, and I flipped it on, and it was so warm, and it felt so good in the way that a really hot shower can feel. And I remember thinking to myself, how is it possible that these 2 worlds exist on the same planet? Because last week, I was in a mud hut outhouse, and it occurred to me that we tend to develop a point of view on risk in the United States that is wrong. It's not risky to start a company. It's risky to not know if you're going to be able to eat. It's not risky to leave a steady job and take a swing at something that excites you more. It's risky to not have access to good health care. Tip of the cap to Obamacare there for having, removed that issue for a lot of Americans. It's not risky to pursue your passion. It's risky not to. And so that was a huge insight for me. And it got me comfortable with jumping into Bonobos when I had $150,000 of credit card debt and, a couple $1,000s in the bank from a 401k that I had to cash in prematurely with a major tax ding. So it was a huge leap of faith, but I feel so humbled that I took it, because building Bonobos over the last decade has been the great privilege of my life. And it never would have happened if I hadn't evolved my perspective on risk, thanks to that trip to Kenya.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. When you're in the position, your first year or two, and you're looking to raise money for the first time. So I've built 2 businesses over the last 10 years that have done fairly well. I've bootstrapped all of those. I'm in the process of building a third in an infinitely different industry for me. It's a high-tech physical product, which I've never done before. So there's a side of me that wants to bootstrap this as well, but the costs associated with building a product in a company like this are infinitely greater and different than a digital one. And so I'm faced with the decision of whether or not I should raise capital. And it's something that I've never done. And I think the risk is always involved in how big of a stupid tax you're going to pay, meaning ignorance is expensive. And I find myself in a position where my level of ignorance on this topic specifically is about as high as it gets, though I'm constantly working on reducing that. What or where did you learn, to go through that process? Were you guided by someone? Did you have a mentor or a coach? Did you just wing it, by reading books? And how did you navigate that world?
Yeah, it's helpful in life to have great luck. And I think you put yourself in a position to have great luck. I think getting lucky is a little bit in our control, even though it sounds like a paradox. So once I made that bet on myself, that I could create a job for myself by building a successful company, that I could find that stability if I could get through, that first 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it takes, so that you can actually get to a level where you feel comfortable. Once I made that decision, I was struck by tremendous good luck. The first investor that I pitched on the idea of Bonobos as a company was a guy named Joel Peterson. Joel was a professor of ours at Stanford Business School, a storied businessman throughout his career, had built 3 or 4 companies, had been on something like 35 or 40 boards, had invested hundreds of millions of dollars across venture capital, private equity, real estate. And one of the more interesting investments he had made is he was the first investor in JetBlue. And JetBlue, along with maybe one or two other companies, Old Navy comes to mind, it's one of the fastest companies ever to $1 billion of revenue. Forget about valuation and the heady Silicon Valley valuations, just in terms of revenue, dollars of sales. One of the two or three fastest companies in human history to that level. Joel was the first investor in JetBlue, and he's now the chairman. So he knows a thing or two about building a great company quickly, scaling it, and building a really great and trusted consumer experience, which is what JetBlue is trying to do in the airline industry. They call it bringing humanity back to air travel. So we were fortunate in that Joel and I sat down. It was an ungodly hour. Joel's an early riser. I think we met at 6 a.m. or something like that. He's a remarkable man. He's got 7 kids, something like 23 grandkids. One of these people who, if we have to colonize Mars, we might send Joel Peterson or some of his kids. So once he invested, I had an amazing mentor kind of built in going forward. And I think if you can get your mentors to invest in what you're doing, you're tremendously fortunate. It's a step in the right direction. And I think I met him on a Friday, and then Monday I went and met with a guy named Andy Ratcliffe, who's one of the 4 founders of Benchmark Capital, which is one of the top 3 venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. And he's now the chairman of a very exciting financial advisor software company called Wealthfront. And Andy also offered to invest in the company, which came as a shock to me because he traditionally invests in pure play technology or software companies. And so then something funny happened, which is once those 2 guys invested, a number of our early customers at Stanford who were classmates of ours said, "What are you talking about? Joel and Andy invested? They really think this online pants company has legs, pun intended." And they all offered, in droves to invest, little amounts of money. So we really leveraged the angel investor universe in the early innings. And frankly, Mike, we had to, because there was no venture capital or institutional capital support for what we were doing. People were like, "You're going to build a better fitting pants brand on the internet? That sounds crazy." And yet, in the history of innovation, what sounds crazy is often what's next. Most compelling ideas that become something big were contrarian when they started. Otherwise, by definition, someone would be doing it. If it's conventional wisdom, it would exist. It tends to not be a good opportunity. If it's consensus, it has to be non-consensus. And hopefully it's non-consensus and right, not non-consensus and wrong. So in the following years, as Bonobos started to work, we ran into an issue, which is it needed more capital to invest in inventory, to invest in marketing, to hire more team members. The e-commerce model isn't cheap. I've written an essay called "E-commerce is a Bear" on actually just how difficult e-commerce is to build a profitable company. I mean, we've had so much innovation in e-commerce in the last 20 years, and I can count on one hand the number of public companies that have succeeded at building even a slightly profitable business. There's not much outside of Amazon. So for the first few years, once we needed more capital and we had exhausted that kind of friends and family angel network, then it was really tough. And so I then spent the next 3 years over 4 seed investment rounds raising $8 million from about 110 people. So I was every day having a coffee or a dinner or a lunch with someone new and doing everything I could to find my way into pockets of money, whether it was people in finance, people in entertainment, people who had been investors, former colleagues from various jobs, meeting with anyone who had a proclivity to put some capital at risk behind this concept. And I have to tell you, I have tremendous respect for the bootstrapping model. It can work great as well. But for me, bringing on really smart people who were investing in the company was one of the best decisions I ever made. And, eventually our fortunes changed and we didn't have to raise just angel capital. And the venture capitalists did start to see the glimmer in what we were doing. And we raised our first proper investment round from 2 firms, one called Lightspeed, another one called Excel. And since then, we've been really blessed with good fortune. Nordstrom has invested in the company. A couple of great retail families have invested. But when it started, it was a massive uphill battle.
You have shared some really, really great advice in some of the talks that I've seen you give when it comes to hiring. And that's such an important piece to this puzzle. If you could share your philosophy when it comes to making sure that you hire the right people, that'd be amazing.
I think at the core of it, Mike, what it is that most people hire on the wrong dimension. They hire on experience. And experience for me is precisely the third most important thing in making a hiring decision, regardless of whether you're on the side of the interviewer or the interviewee. And the perfect example of that is that we lead the whole process around a resume. It's around what you've done. I actually think there's two things that are far more important than experience. And those are passion for the mission of the company or the organization and fit with that company's culture, core virtues, core values. And so passion for me is an easy one, which is in a world with no money, in a world where everyone was paid a fixed salary, would you want to work at that company or organization? Would you come alive, if not every day, on most days, from an energy perspective, to go and work at that place? And if the answer is no, if the answer isn't hell yes, then don't go work there. Because if you don't have passion, you're not going to thrive. You may survive, but you're not going to thrive. And that's one of the great paradoxes of the universe, which is that some of the most successful people in the world, the happiest people professionally, are people who are doing something that doesn't at all to them feel like work. So that's number one. And number two is really figure out, are you a fit with the personalities from a culture standpoint? Do you mesh? Do you jive with it? And so at Bonobos, from the flip side of evaluating who to hire, we've gotten really articulate about what human values we're looking for in the people that we hire. And we've got 5 that we look for: self-awareness, empathy, positive energy, intellectual honesty, and judgment. So self-awareness for me is the most predictive trait of leaders. Do you know your strengths and weaknesses? Can you develop on your weaknesses because you know them and own them? Empathy, can you imagine the world from the perspective of other human beings? Can you get out of your own skin and your own head? Judgment, do you make good decisions in the face of uncertainty? Positive energy, are you not a fun sponge? Do you put good energy into a room when you walk in, into a workplace when you're there? Doesn't have to mean being the most gregarious person. It just means a positive spirit, which can be entirely possessed by introverts as well as extroverts. And then lastly, intellectual honesty, which is, can you change your mind? Passion is important, but does data matter to you? And so by putting those two things first, passion for the mission and fit with the culture, you increase dramatically the odds that you're going to be happy where you go to work or that you're going to be happy with the hire that you've made. In experience, matters. You're not going to, if you're running an orchestra, you're not going to hire someone who plays the trombone for the violin section. But it's not the most important thing.
Yeah, I would have to agree with all of that. I found that the more exciting your mission is and the more focused you and the entire company is on that mission, it's like a giant magnet that just pulls the rest of the world towards you, whether that's your team members or your investors or your customers or whatever it may be. If you just simply focus on that, it's just downhill from there, which has been super valuable from an experience standpoint. One of the opportunities that is coming online in the last year, for entrepreneurs specifically, is the fact that it's now legal to, raise funding from a crowd basis, right? So not just pre-selling your product via Kickstarter, but actually raising capital from non-accredited public friends and family and whatever it may be. There's a lot of people who are suggesting going down that path, and there's some pluses and minuses to it. I think as you mentioned here a few minutes ago, one of the most valuable things that you get from raising capital is you don't just get the money, you get the experience and the brain space of the people who invest in you, which is, I would argue, infinitely more valuable than the cash. And that doesn't necessarily happen if you're going to raise it from a public, crowdfunded type of model. Have you looked into that at all, and do you have an opinion about it?
I do. I have seen a lot of this develop over the last 10 years. And for Bonobos 2007 to 2010, we were really pre-Kickstarter. We were pre-AngelList. We were before a lot of these tools were developed. So I don't have the benefit of having direct experience, but I've seen it from one of my hobbies, which is angel investing. And I started a fund with one of our first employees at Bonobos, a guy named Dave Eisenberg, called Red Swan. And you can check out our portfolio of companies at redswan.vc. We've invested in a bunch of companies where we've gotten to know the entrepreneurs, from Warby Parker to Coinbase, Modern Meadow to Birchbox. So we've been fortunate to invest in a bunch of great companies. I think between Red Swan and just personally doing some investing, maybe 55 or 60 great entrepreneurs. And from those companies, what I've seen is, I think it takes four things to make a great entrepreneur. I think you need magnetism to attract talent and capital at all costs. You need authenticity for what you're doing, tremendous authenticity. That passion for the mission bar, it's the highest for the founder. Tenacity that you'll put your head through a brick wall. And then you need the evolutionary ability over time to develop yourself and to develop your company through various iterations in what you're doing to give yourself a chance to succeed. And so when you think about two of those, tenacity and magnetism as a combination are what's required to raise capital. And I think you have to do whatever it takes. From my perspective, a Kickstarter campaign, for example, is a great way to build some buzz around what you're doing. You probably want to complement that with some actual human beings who can be great sounding boards for you and who can give you great advice. AngelList can be a great way to raise capital. It tends to be a better complement rather than a sole means of raising capital, because a lot of the ways that people get confidence in investing in an AngelList company is who are the non-AngelList investors in the company. So I think these are great tools, but I don't think they alone will enable you to be successful. I think at best, it's a hybrid approach. And if you're fortunate enough to not need to use them, that may be the best route because it's the most scalable. It requires the least maintenance. It leads to the more uncomplicated ownership structure in your company. And to the extent that it matters, it enables you to keep what you're doing a little bit closer to the vest.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. So this has been an absolutely fascinating interview, Andy. And I wanted to ask you one last question, which is, what do you need help with most? How can we support you and your mission? And is there any way that we can serve that?
Yeah, there's two things that you can do that everyone who's listening to this can do. The first is to just know the story of the namesake of bonobos. So not everyone is aware, but bonobos are arguably the coolest animal on the planet. There's 5 great apes: chimps, orangutans, gorillas, bonobos, and the one that people tend to guess last, which is Homo sapiens, human beings. And what makes bonobos original amongst those 5 is they're the only of the 5 that have developed matriarchal societies with no violent conflict. And so what bonobos have learned is something that human beings are slowly learning, which is if you put your women in charge, men behave better. And I think we're on a really remarkable 500-year journey that started at the beginning of the 20th century, where women have gone from not having the right to vote to, potentially a couple months from now, the leaders of Germany, the United Kingdom, Australia, and perhaps the United States. So it's a really inspiring animal, and it's also an endangered animal. They live in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a country that over the last 20 years has by far been the deadliest conflict since World War II. Somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5 million killed, which is a massive outlier relative to anything else that's happened since the end of World War II in terms of the human death toll. And so it's one of the great ironies of the world that the most peaceful animal on the planet lives in the most violent country on the planet over the last, decade or two. And so I've gotten really excited to get behind a bonobo orphanage outside of Kinshasa called Lola Ya Bonobo. The woman who runs it, Claudine Andre, is a Belgian lady who's lived in the Congo for decades, who's an absolute inspiration. She was interviewed most recently by Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes. And so if you want to check that video out, it's online. And just be aware that we think about bonobos as a movement. The inspiration is a modern-minded animal. And we think that we're trying to build a brand that stands for the evolution of mankind, starting with pants. And so, it's a little bit symbolic, but it's an important symbol. We're living at a time where feminism is on the move. Gay people have the right to get married for the first time on a national basis as of last year, which took us long enough. We're finally having the right conversation about transgender. What it means to be a guy is evolving. because we have often defined ourselves by relationships to some of those groups that I'm talking about. And so it's an exciting time to be a guy, but it's a confusing time. And we hope as Bonobos to be on the front lines of how to think about that. And, our recent campaign with Jimmy Butler, who's had an extraordinary life. His father left at 18 months. His mother kicked him out of the house at the age of 13, saying reportedly, "I don't like the looks of you." And then somehow muscling through that as an orphan and becoming an NBA All-Star and an Olympian. So he's a role model. And so the evolution of mankind is important to us, and being aware of that is number one. And number two is our brand's in the early innings. We hope to be the first $1 billion of revenue men's brand since Ralph Lauren was launched in 1967 and Brooks Brothers was launched in 1818. So I like to joke to our team, this opportunity comes along once in every 100 years. We better not screw it up. And yet, even though we've had tremendous success to date, we think our brand awareness is somewhere in the 15% neighborhood. You were saying yourself, only recently learned of the brand. And so, just help us get the word out. We've got stores in 25 different places. We've got full distribution in Nordstrom across 121 doors. And, bonobos.com is always open for business. So, try us out and tell your friends if you like what you see.
Awesome. Well, Andy, this was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us here today and for your time. I can't wait to go check out the store here later today. And guys, go check out bonobos.com and make sure you follow Andy Dunn. I know you've got a Twitter account, and that's probably where you're most active. And we'll put a link to that here in the show notes as well. But Andy, thank you. It was a real treat. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Mike. It was an honor to be with you.
Money. money. Money.